Chile protests, 5 dead after looters torch garment factory. Protesters and security forces clashed for a third day in Santiago. Demonstrators clash with a riot police vehicle in Santiago. The protests were sparked by a now suspended metro fare hike. 5 people have died after a garment factory was set ablaze by looters near Chile's capital Santiago amid a wave of violent protests. News from BBC. All clips may not represent the story. Watch to learn English the way you've learned your mother tongue, as this video is especially made. The military and police used tear gas and water cannon against protesters, and a curfew was imposed in major cities. A state of emergency already in place in Santiago is to be extended to cities in the country's north and south. The unrest, sparked by a now suspended metro fare hike, has widened to reflect anger over living costs and inequality. In a late-night statement on television, President Sebastián Piñera said, "We're at war against a powerful enemy, who is willing to use violence without any limits." What's happening on the ground? In several cities on Sunday, protesters set more buses on fire, smashed up metro stations and clashed with riot police. A nighttime curfew was imposed in the areas of Santiago, Valparaiso, Coquimbo and Biobío. Meanwhile, a state of emergency will be applied to Antofagasta, Valparaiso, Valdivia, Chillán, Talca, Temuco and Punta Arenas, allowing authorities to restrict people's freedom of movement and their right to assembly. Speaking to journalists, Interior Minister Andrés Chadwick said there had been 70 serious incidents of violence, including 40 lootings of supermarkets and other businesses. "We're facing a real escalation that is undoubtedly organized to cause serious damage to our country and the lives of each of its citizens," he said. Some 10,500 police and soldiers had been deployed to the streets, he said, and at least 7 people had died in incidents related to the protests, without giving details. Firefighters said they found 5 bodies inside a factory burned by rioters in a suburb of Santiago. More than 1,400 people were detained across the country, officials said, while 2 people suffered gunshot wounds after a clash with police. In Santiago, shops remained closed, almost all public transport was suspended and some flights at the international airport were cancelled or rescheduled because of insufficient crew. At least one line of the city's metro was expected to reopen on Monday after the entire system was closed on Friday because of the damage caused during the unrest, the worst to hit one of Latin America's most stable countries in decades. What else did the president say? A billionaire conservative, Mr. Piñera has been criticized for his response to the protests, the most severe crisis of his current term. He said people who were causing fires, setting up barricades and looting were criminals. "We're very aware that those behind the riots have a degree of organization, logistics, typical of a criminal organization," he said. "I call on all my compatriots to unite in this battle against violence and delinquency." Mr. Piñera, who took office in March 2018 after having served as president between 2010 and 2014, has deployed soldiers and tanks for the first time since 1990, when Chile returned to democracy after the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. What's the background? The unrest has exposed divisions in the nation, one of the region's wealthiest but also one of its most unequal, and intensified calls for economic reforms. Protester Constanza González told the BBC, "This isn't about political parties. I think people are angry and this was a thing that had been coming for quite a long time." Mr. Piñera suspended the rise in the Santiago metro fare on Saturday, saying he had listened with humility to the voice of my compatriots. Chile is one of South America's most stable and prosperous nations. It has been relatively free of the coups and arbitrary governments that have blighted the continent. The exception was the 17-year rule of General Augusto Pinochet, whose 1973 coup was one of the bloodiest in 20th century Latin America and whose dictatorship left more than 3,000 people dead and missing. Chile's unusual, ribbon-like shape, 4,300 kilometers long and on average 175 kilometers wide, has given it a hugely varied climate. This ranges from the world's driest desert, the Atacama, in the north, through a Mediterranean climate in the center, to a snow-prone alpine climate in the south, with glaciers, fjords and lakes. Chile is a multi-ethnic society, including people of European and Indian ancestry. Sebastián Pinera won the presidential election in December 2017, having served as president for 4 years until 2014. Local markets soared on hopes of more investor-friendly policies expected to be introduced by the billionaire conservative. Chile's national and local terrestrial TV channels operate alongside extensive cable TV networks, which carry many US and international stations. Radio is an important source of news. There are hundreds of stations, most of them commercial. Troops fire on the presidential palace during coup in which President Allende died. 1535 Indigenous Araucanian people successfully resist first Spanish invasion of Chile. 1541 Pedro de Valdivia begins Spanish conquest and founds Santiago. 1810 Junta in Santiago proclaims autonomy for Chile following the overthrow of the King of Spain by Napoleon, but Spain regains control of Chile in 1814. 1818 Chile becomes independent. 1879–84 Chile increases its territory by 1/3 after it defeats Peru and Bolivia in War of the Pacific. Late 19th century, pacification of indigenous Araucanians paves way for European immigration. Large-scale mining of nitrate and copper begins. 1891 Civil War over constitutional dispute between President and Congress ends in congressional victory, with President reduced to figurehead. 1970 Salvador Allende becomes world's first democratically elected Marxist president and embarks on an extensive program of nationalization and radical social reform. 1973 Chief of Staff General Augusto Pinochet ousts Allende in coup and proceeds to establish a brutal dictatorship which lasts until 1990. 1989 elections mark return to civilian rule. Please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.